And what we have is a replica. What came down to us was a replica of the Quran. In Quran, the references of Quran in Quran is Kitabul Maknoon, the hidden book, Ummul Kitab, the mother of the book, Kitabul Mubin, manifest book in the surahs. 56 means surah number 56, and then 77 to 78 means those are the verses of that surah. Now, I should have said the obligation of Quran. The obligation of Quran we all know. The obligation of Quran is for us to read correctly, recite it. It is the word recite, so that itself should tell us that there is an oral element that is recited. So we have to recite it correctly, we have to understand the teachings, we have to act upon the teachings, we have to communicate the teachings, and these are all different levels. And the lowest level, scholar says that considering Quran as book of Allah, respecting it, if we talk to scholars, they give the etiquette, like if there's a Quran, you only put another Quran on top of it. Don't put any other book on it. But then in the current age that we are in of computers, Qurans are on CDs, so I think people will have to come up with some further guidelines on that. Here is the phases of the revelation. Quran came down in two phases. In the phase one, Quran came down from the Luh Mahfouz to the seventh heaven. We believe, Muslims believe that there are 7 levels of heavens. So that is why we talk about taqwa. The person who is most cognizant of taqwa, inshallah, will be reaching to the highest level of heaven. And that is how the Sufis, they say that, oh Allah, I want your company. I want to be as close to you as possible. So the intention there is that I want to be in that highest level, very close to Arsh Allah. So in the phase one, Quran came down from Arsh Allah to the lowest of the heavens. From our side, from the worldly side, it is going to be the first heaven. And now that happened in the night of Qadr, and according to most scholars, it happened in the year 610, 610 or Christian year. And it is mentioned in Quran in Surah Qadr, Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr. So that is when it came. It came in one step. The entire Quran came down. And from there, in the second phase, from the seventh heaven to our world, our solar system, it came piecemeal fashion, little bit at a time. Sometimes some verses came down, sometimes the whole surah came down, sometimes sections came down. And it took about 23 years. And if you know, from our knowledge of the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, most people, they believe that, most historians, they record his date of birth as 568, some say 570. And Prophet became a prophet. Prophethood was bestowed on him when he was 40 years old. So that brings us to that 610. That is when the first wahi, first revelation came down. And that came down, the first 5 verses of Surah Al, and that came down and came Hira. So that is the second phase. Another question about the second phase is that sometimes people, they question, why did it have to come bit by bit? Because as things were changing, people would come and ask Prophet Muhammad for some questions. He would not know the answer, and he would say, wait, I have to wait until the wahi comes down. And then they had the concept, according to Muslim scholars, that sometimes verses will come down, and then afterwards Allah will abrogate those verses and replace them with better verses. So that is why it probably may have taken like that. And then also, this was something new that was coming to a pagan community. The first addressees were the pagan Arabs. They had their own customs. So in order to break those customs and adopt new customs, and if everything is given at one time, it would be humanly difficult. So the first addressees were the pagans, and there were some Christians and Jews at the time living in Arabia. So and then after that, the entire humanity, the people that lived during the time of Prophet Muhammad to the time when this world is going to end, this Quran came down. Collection and compilation. We'll look at it in 2 phases again. This is the first part is during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In those days, people used to memorize. It used to be the custom in those days to memorize the genealogies. They used to be written down because they were in tribes. So they wanted to make sure who is part of the tribe. So it was a very customary routine for people to memorize. They used to fight in battles. They used to memorize that. And those of us who are from India and Pakistan, we can relate that. We read about the Mughal. They had historians that would write down the main events. So in at that time, one or two members of the family, their task was to memorize. Like now we have Fs, Hafis, Upas, like that they used to memorize. So it was a custom. So those people, when those ayat were coming down, Prophet Muhammad will relate to his companions. And they would write. If they could memorize it, they would memorize it. And if they could write down, they would write down on whatever material was available at that time. Those of us who have gone to Hajj or Umrah, you must have seen when we go to Medina, outside of that there is a platform called as the Ashab-e-Safa. That is where some of the companions of Prophet Muhammad used to sit. And all their job was they used to learn from Prophet Muhammad. And during the daytime, they would go out in the city and they would propagate that to others and teach that to others. And then there were people that could write down. They are referred to as Katib-e-Wahi. Wahi is the revelation that's coming down, and Katib is writers. According to scholars, there's about 40 of them, more than 40 of them, that wrote down. They would write down in whatever material was available at that time. They would write down on bones, on shoulder bones, splat, could be written on clay, papyrus. Somebody should do some research, and maybe if you can let me know, when was paper discovered? Maybe at that time when paper was discovered, they may have written on paper also. But the thing to remember is that it was not in the form of a book, but it was customary with that any time Prophet would get a wahi, he would tell the people, they would write and they would say, read it back to me. And if there was a mistake, he would say, no, there's a mistake there. That would take place. And then the second thing that would happen was Prophet, and this was done by the assistance of angel Jibreel. So there was divine help there. And Prophet would say, this particular verse that has come down is going to be part of this surah. So you put it under that surah. Or this verse is part of this surah. So that the order was also being organized and also informed. Another thing that we need to remember is that there is a hadith which says, Jibreel taught me to read the Quran in one dialect, and when I recited it, he taught me to recite it in another dialect, and so on until the number of dialects increased to 7. You must have heard of the Sabah Qiraat. We need to have a little bit of good understanding. I'm not saying that I know very well, but these are brothers are things that we need to discuss and have a clear idea of this in our minds. Back then, the Arab community was tribal. There were several tribes there. So some of the people from Prophet Muhammad was of the Quraysh tribe. And there were some people from the other tribe, they would come and tell Prophet Muhammad that, we are having difficulty in enunciating. And we can see that, I speak Urdu. In Urdu, I was not taught that there's a difference of equivalent of V and W. So I sometimes run into confusing it. Similarly, if you take at other languages, because of the voice muscles not being practiced, they have difficulty in saying some of the phonetics. Like the American English, or they cannot say, they cannot say. Those, fortunately, we have those phonetics in our language, so we can say. So similarly, those tribes probably had difficulty. So they would come and tell Prophet that, we